stress, it really plays a tremendous part in a race down at Daytona Beach.
Cale's first win at Daytona would come with a little help from a future ally.
Here's Cale Yarborough coming in rather slowly, but he goes right through the Wood Brothers pit, clear through it. Apparently, he couldn't stop the car.
When I seen he was out of gas, I was the gas man for my car at that particular time, and I just gassed him. I'm a person that if I can't win myself, I'd like for one of my friends to win.
Cale did just that, marking the first of 3 straight wins at Daytona.
It certainly wasn't a soggy firecracker for you, Cale Yarborough, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was a big explosion.
In 1968, Ford designed the Cale Yarborough Mercury Cyclone. It was in this car that Cale and the Wood Brothers would have their greatest success.
Well, at a caution flag, this thing's skipping. And he comes in, and I crawl in the window to switch the ignition. He says, "Man," says, "you gotta fix this thing," says, "it'll fly." Cuts the tire down, gets the lap down, he makes that up, and then passes for the lead about 10 laps to go of the race.
Did you have any tough problems throughout the contest?
Nothing but problems all day, Chris. Everything in the world went wrong with, I thank the great Wood Brothers. Nobody else, I don't feel, was trying to pull us through it.
The Daytona 500 has always been big, but my win in Darlington in 1968, I would take it over any Daytona 500 because that's where it all started for me. That was the last race on the old racetrack.
Cale hit the wall. He hit the wall and bounces right between those 2 cars. There is one of the most superb pieces of driving we'll ever see.
Everybody had to run up against that guardrail, and sometime during the race, if not every time, you was going to touch that guardrail. So that's where the Darlington strike came from. You had to kind of bounce off that guardrail if you was going to run fast around there.
Battling Cale for the win was another South Carolina native, David Pearson. They fought each other, and they fought the track.
That was one of the toughest races that probably he and I both ever drove.
Anytime that I had run with him, he was tough to pass.
Pearson on the inside, trying to take him. And they're absolutely right together, and Pearson bangs him into the wall again, and Pearson's in a spin. Cale gets through, and Pearson is down on the infield.
Cale was unstoppable in 1968, winning 6 races in only 21 starts.
Well, Cale, it must be a happy day for you, eh?
Chris, this is the happiest day of my life.
4 big speedway races, a new record in one season, and the first time victory before a hometown crowd.
Right, and do it at home, that makes it better than anything in the world.
That 68 was the special race in my career.
Throughout his career, Cale was renowned for his toughness. It was written on his face and in the record books.
They didn't know come any tougher than Cale. I mean, it didn't make no difference. He was hard as that cement floor right there.
He was a tough one. There ain't a tougher driver ever been on the racetrack than he is.
There was nothing that scared Cale Yarborough. He was braver than Dick Tracy.
We'd gone like 4 or 5 races in a row where we didn't see eye to eye, and so we got to Darlington, and I caught him going out the gate, and I said, we gotta stop this junk before somebody gets hurt. And he said, "Get your best hope, big boy."
In Cale's 560 starts, he would never once need a relief driver.
He did need one, but he wouldn't take it. We burned a rear end out. He come in down the pit road. He'd been smelling that oil, burn oil. Cale was vomiting out the window. They gave him oxygen and stuff. I forget who it was had fell out, and I had had them standing by to get in the car. And when they let it down on the ground, Cale come back out and he said, ain't nobody gonna drive my car. I'm getting back in it. And he got back in and he finished the race too.
He's like a John Wayne type. He would never back down, it looked like, from a challenge. And you hear this, people talking about, hey, he was a farm boy that crawled underneath the fence to go to his first Darlington race. He didn't let anything stand in his way, and I think a lot of people admired him for that and his tenacity.
He's a very determined man. His motivations sometimes amazes me.
Did you really push the car, Cale?
I drove it hard as it run all day.
Cale Yarborough back from Vietnam and back in victory lane.
In the late 60s, America was a divided country. Cale showed his support for the U.S. troops in Vietnam as a guest of the USO in 1968.
I love this country, and I love my part of the country, and anything that I can do to help the United States, I'm all for it.
Major car manufacturers left NASCAR in 1970 to pursue other marketing avenues. That left Cale and the Wood brothers without factory backing.
We didn't think we was gonna be racing the next year, you know, because Ford had pulled out of racing, and so we didn't know what we was gonna do.
I was there with them for 5 years until Ford decided that they were going to pull out of racing, and by that time I'd built up enough debt that I had to have a job somewhere to pay my bills.
So he decided to go up and try IndyCar a little bit.
1971-72 seasons, Cale left NASCAR to drive Indy cars.
I had run 2 years at Indianapolis in the Indy 500, 66 and 67. So Gene White, he came to me after Ford pulled out, and he says, I'll give you a 2-year contract to run Indy cars, my Indy cars for 2 years with a good salary, and I could make some money racing and all, and so I didn't have any choice. I went with him.
It was up here. It was the epitome. It was #1. People wanted to go to where they thought was the ultimate.
That is known as the biggest race. Waiting for them to say, driver, start your engine. My racing career started in a soapbox derby, and down a hill in Darlington, South Carolina. And I was sitting in that little Indy car, and all of a sudden, I was sitting in that soapbox derby car, looking down that hill, and I was looking down the straightaway at Indy, and it was just, it was just a thrill. I said, look where I started, and look what I'm fixing to do.
The transition from stock cars to open-wheel racing proved difficult. Cale's best finish was 10th place in the 1972 Indianapolis 500.
But they were little cars. They were probably something where you get out of the stock car and you get in the Indy car and you go, pretty much feel like King Kong, you know, because you had this little bitty thing that you could thrash around.
Never had the equipment to win, even though it took 2 years away from my stock car career. I'm glad I did it.
Cale was always one of those kind of mysterious type of drivers, and I always wondered if he would wind up being like another A.J. Foyt, because he would just seem like the man who could drive anything.
When the contract was up, I wanted to come back to NASCAR, because NASCAR was where my heart was. I needed a ride, and Junior Johnson needed a driver.
Junior Johnson was a legend as a driver. But by 1973, Junior Johnson, the car owner, was still searching for the right driver.
You know, I wanted a guy that was kind of my meditation of what I was when I was driving. I didn't give up. I didn't concede to losing.
Junior was one of my heroes when he was driving race cars. He ran just as hard as he could run every lap, and that's the way I did my whole career.
The last American hero, Junior Johnson. What kind of instruction did you give Cale Yarborough for the race? Go to the front.
Success would not come quickly for Cale, Junior, or the number 11 team.
Once you get a chance to see Cale evolve and win all the big races, and then it was time for him to take the next step, he had an opportunity to go to work for Junior Johnson. And to be perfectly honest, he tore up everything Junior had. And that was one of those concepts of, you run it as hard as you possibly can, which Cale was notorious for doing, and let us worry about how to fix the race car.
It was just the car. You had to get the car underneath of it. And if you did, it didn't make no difference to him. He'd drive the far out of that thing.
Chris, up a little bit. This is the real tricky part of the racetrack. Getting into number 4.
Anybody's ever watched him drive a race car makes you think this car's got to be a handful, because all he did the whole time was he kept working the car, Cale could feel things, and I think that's the reason why he wasn't afraid to put a race car on his shoulders when it wasn't quite right. He could adjust.
I always told the people, he drove harder down the straightaway than I drove in the corner. I mean, that's how hard he drove a race car.
Then in 1976, everything clicked. Cale put together a banner year, scoring 9 wins and his first Cup championship. Cale and Junior were just hitting their stride.
Junior and I kind of grew up in the rural South, because he was in the mountains and I was down here in the flatlands, but he and I thought a lot alike.
I think they were basically looking at one another in the mirror. They were so much alike, their common interest away from the racetrack, but their common desire and what they wanted out of their race team.
If this car here, number 11, can get to the starting line, not the finish line, if it can take the green flag to begin the race, then the man who drives it will be the champion of the year for the first time in his life. And that's Cale Yarborough. Stand right here, Cale. Just got to get it to the green flag.
Right. That's all we got to do, Jim. It's been a long, hard season. This is the race I've been looking for all year, the last one.
And there's the jubilation in the Junior Johnson pit, because their man, Cale Yarborough, has won the year-long championship.
Cale, you won the championship the way a champion should win it, and I want to congratulate you and wish you well next year.
Thank you, Chris. We'll be back.
Winning that first one and getting that behind you was probably the best one for me.
A lot of happiness here in Victory Lane. It's always like that.
In 1976 through 1978, Cale was nearly unbeatable, winning 28 races and becoming the first driver in NASCAR history to capture 3 straight Cup titles. In 1979, Daytona 500 was the first Cup race broadcast live to a national television audience. It marked a new chapter in NASCAR and the legend of Cale Yarborough.
A lot of people don't realize that the reason why we were down so many laps in the course of the 1979 Daytona 500 was because of the 2 Allison brothers wrecking one another and us getting caught up in the early part of the race and getting stuck in the mud.
Donnie Allison's out of control. Spinning. He gets hit by his brother. He's all the way around. Cale Yarborough's on the grass, that wet grass now incredibly slippery. And Cale Yarborough desperately trying to get that car back on the track now.
Despite his early setbacks, Cale challenged Donnie Allison for the lead.
He would run him down, slingshot him down the backstretch to get a lap back. And he did that to Donnie all day long.
I had made up 2 or 3 laps on Donnie. Donnie had been watching me do that all day, and He knew what was coming. He knew what was going to happen.